Hey there, and welcome back to the show. So, I have a special guest this time, and we have a common story to share. Karen has you've got several books, but this is a new one that's out. And so I've invited her on to tell her story, to talk about the book. And more than anything else, it's really just to have a place for our stories to land for anyone who may have experienced this, who may not understand like the nervous system response or actually what happens, why we experience shame, how we get stuck in that loop. So we are going to just give you a lot of everything today. So I hope you enjoy the show. So I'm going to start off with Karen. I just want you to introduce yourself, and I'll say from my end, Karen and I are peers. We have a lot in common. We're both 6'2" role models according to human design. We're both off the roof. And we've had several conversations, and I absolutely love her story. So when I saw she had a new book coming out, I invited her to come on and share with you guys. So take it away. I'm going to mute myself and let you how did you get here?
So it's funny because I'm asked that question a lot, and I always answer it this way the first time. I have a mother. and and my relationship with my mom has been in the past a source of a lot of suffering. And I'm not as I'm not as up to speed on all of the human design language, but I know enough to know that the process of getting of what a 6'2" goes through. I can sort of overlay that on my story, and I'm not going to do that necessarily as I talk about myself, but so I have this. I'm kind of losing it here a little bit. Oh my goodness, I'm live and I'm on the spot. And this is so fascinating, right? Because this is exactly what we teach, right? This is right. Like I got to get back and present with myself here. I'm not dissociating quite that bad, but I'm like, oh, I can't.
Would you like me to start over? Let's
No,
just
that's
pause
fine.
for a second and ask the question again. It's perfect.
Oh boy. Um, so I have a mother, and I've had a lot of suffering in my relationship with my mother. And at a certain point in my life, I guess it was probably after the second Saturn return. I don't even know when that is. I woke up to the fact that this relationship was having a very negative impact on my life. And as we are taught in coaching, right? Yes, our thoughts are important, but unless we are also aware of what's happening inside us on a bodily level, all the thought work in the world isn't going to help. And interestingly, it was when I went to coach school, right? So Kim was sharing earlier with me more of like what happens during these different phases of being a 6'2", where there's that period of time where we go and we look for all the resources, and we maybe get therapy, or we become therapists, or we, get certifications, or we're wanting to learn. And that's what I was doing at a certain point in my life after I cut ties with my mom at the end of 2010. Thinking it would be forever. There had been sort of a last straw. And let me back up. I just wanted to show the book that I just wrote. And a lot of the stories are in here, the ones that I'm sort of referencing here. So I cut ties with my mom, and that's when I sort of got pulled into coaching. I had a friend who became a coach. I'm like, what's that? I, started exploring different methodologies, different healing modalities, all of that kind of thing. And so it was through the process of um, learning about coaching, becoming a coach, being a client, doing other types of work, that I realized, I think like many of us do, oh, this is what I'm here to do, is to help other women with this relationship, right? With the relationship that they have with their moms. And for some of them, it's also with their adult daughters. Um,
Can I
and
ask you a question just to preface this back?
yeah,
So at what point were you with your, so in the book, you talk about like shame and trauma and the reactions that we have from what's in the body, not necessarily, it's like the mind's like, oh, this is fine, I'm normal, everything's great. And then the body's having this reaction.
yes.
At what point were you in when you decided to become a coach? Like, what had happened prior to that? Were you in the awareness that you needed healing, or was it
Yes.
just like the next cool thing to do?
Maybe a little bit of both. A little bit of both, probably. I think it's like there was like, this is cool, and oh, it's bringing up something, and what's that I need to pay attention to? Because it was during coach training. It was actually during my master coach training in 2014. So at that point, I had been estranged from my mom for several years. And I'm in this master coach training. And, prior to that, a lot of the trainings and things, I was focusing more on body image and weight.
Mm.
Because that's obviously, I think most of us can agree that body image and weight are often, if we have issues in that area, that it can often be related to our moms. Not necessarily because our moms are terrible people, but right, that's a thing. But it was during coach training, master coach training, that my mother stuff was really coming to a head. And at that time, I was actually my grandmother's legal guardian, my mom's mom.
Mm-hmm.
And I will never forget the day. It was a call. It was a day where I was going to be having a call with Brooke of the Life Coach School, because I was in Master Coach training. And back then we were doing it on the phone. And I don't remember how many of us were in there, maybe 12 of us or something like that. And that day I got an email from my mom that sent me sky high with rage. And the reason, so yes, we were estranged, but because I was my grandmother's legal guardian, I was required by law to be in contact with my grandmother's 3 children, my mother and her siblings. And my mother sent me an email asking me a question about my grandmother's trust, of all things. And as I said, I went from 0 to 100 on the rage scale. And then I have this call with the master coach call training, and I'm all like, just like fuming with anger. And over the course of that call, but then, subsequent calls and interactions with Brooke during this training, I really got to see where this anger was coming from a mindset perspective, like what I was believing, not so much about my mom, but about myself in relation to my mom, that was creating this anger. The story that I had about myself, which was definitely a shame-based story, is, well, initially it's, she thinks I'm stupid. But underneath that was, and maybe she's right.
Wow. That's the beauty. That is the beauty of our schooling. That is the beauty of the mindset part, is the factuation. It brings the facts to a head without the emotion, so we can see the mirror, because it's all foggy before that, because the emotions are so tangled. So I just want to make sure for those who are listening, because I can kind of follow you, but because I should have brought you on and introduced you. So
I know, I'm just
we
being a
have so
human
much
over
in
here,
common, guys, and we did start talking before this, and so I think that's, that kind of led into this part of it. But the difference is, Karen's mother was there; she was present, and my mother was not. But as I was reading her book, I told her when I came on, I was like, I'm so triggered. Like I was so triggered by reading it because it was so familiar. What was going on inside of you was so familiar, but my mother wasn't there. How is that possible? And so when you bring this to mindset, that's what makes it possible. The story that I created in my own mind about her not being there, meaning I'm not worthy enough to even have my mother keep me,
Exactly.
is that same, that is what is in the cells of our being. That is what, that I'll use the word imprint. That experience is what imprinted our unworthiness and our doubts and hit on all of our fears. So
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to like kind of bring that
No,
home where
that's,
the connection was, because
yeah.
some who are listening to this were abused by their mother, some were left by their mother, some were rejected by their mother. But there's so many different ways that this trauma has affected us, but the core belief is the same.
Exactly. And that's why, right? And I'm guessing you read in the beginning of the book, the prologue of the night that I got sick. This was like 2021, I think. And I had this vision of women standing sort of in a line, handing a box, right, to the next woman. And she takes that box and she sort of tucks it in, right, sort of simultaneously as she then takes it out and hands it to the next woman, and on down and down and down, right? Because yes, this is about you and your mom, or me and my mom, right? And our very specific relationship. But right, it's also about our mother's relationship with their mothers, and on and on. And speaking of it being imprinted in our cells, in our DNA, the stories in the box that get handed down, right? And I say, like, the box might look different when it gets handed to the next person, right? But inside is the same basic story of I'm not okay, I'm not enough, I'm bad, I'm wrong, all of those types of stories. And we can look at that culturally, and we can look at that as, I mean, if we wanted to talk about it religiously, which I'm not super religious, but like there's a story in the Bible, right? Eve was a bad woman. That's a easy analogy, right? But like the idea that women are not valued equally in our culture, right? All of that gets twisted in us. It gets, corrupted in us. It comes out differently in different people, right? It might cause one mother to abandon her child. It might cause another mother to abuse her child. It might cause another woman to really step out of that paradigm, hopefully, and change the course, right? Right, the pattern breakers.
Yeah, it's what was so you had the image. How old were you when that happened?
This vision that I had,
Yeah, the
it
vision.
was 2 years ago. I was 58.
Okay. So when you had the vision and you heard that it's not her, like,
Yours.
yeah, it's not yours.
This isn't mine. Yeah, it's not
Yeah,
mine.
yeah.
Right? It's collectively ours, but it didn't start with me.
So the vision is these women passing this box on and on and on. And then the voice that came through, the voice of wisdom and understanding.
Yeah. That, and I will back up and say that what had happened earlier that day, and I do outline this story in the book. So there's this epilogue that sort of like foreshadows a story that comes later in the book, where I was sitting with a mentor on Zoom, and she asked me, because so speaking of boxes, here's my little box. It's I call box of shame.
Shame.
um, which came from having that vision. But I was talking to this mentor, and one of my shame-based thoughts is I'm a pathetic loser. And that came in my, I don't know, around 10, maybe 10 years old. Again, there's stories in the book about that. But my mentor asked me, she said, "Do you think your mom or your grandmother ever felt like a pathetic loser or ever said that about themselves?" I'm like, no way. Like, not my mother. No, like, does she have shame? Sure. But like that, not that flavor. And I actually started to think about it. And I thought to myself, because I know enough about my mom's history and my grandmother's history, I've paid attention to that. That's been interesting to me to know as much as I could about them. And even though I can't know exactly what they were thinking and feeling at various points in their life, I was actually able to imagine, because of what I know about their history, that yes, indeed, they probably did feel that way. Maybe they didn't use that language, but they probably did. And I sat here talking to my mentor and I'm like, oh my God, it's not mine. And what happened is that late, and I was like, literally, I was banging the desk. And later that night, I'm laying in bed and I started to feel sick. And I got up and I went to the bathroom and I was sick, both ends. And I remember thinking, okay, I better like just hang out in the bathroom for a while. And I'm laying there on the floor. And that's when this vision came to me of these women with the box. And what was really fascinating about that sick moment is that it wasn't a stomach bug. It wasn't food poisoning, because I felt fine within like half an hour and everything else. And it was fine. I think it was literally me purging.
Yes, absolutely. I'm 100% agree. I've
And
had
I'm
the same
like,
experience and worked with clients who have the same experience, because it's like the new experience becomes the catalyst that triggers the upheaval so that we can release it. I had a similar experience, and I was just like moving and had my hands and just kind of doing some energy work with myself. And this big ball came to the surface and just purged out. And that's like the phenomenal part of healing. That's like when someone's like thinking I'm going on a healing journey and they think that there's going to be a point where you just healed. It doesn't work that way. It's moments of untethering. It's moments of releasing and moments of understanding. Everything is just happening in moments as we're getting through the layers and the memories and the experience when it's safe to have
do
them.
it. Yes.
When it's safe to have them. And that is at the command of the nervous system.
Exactly.
But when we don't understand the nervous system and we keep resisting and we keep fighting and we keep trying to make it go away, we're actually, we've got that, the fight and the resistance is the thing that blocks it. It blocks the awareness, because that's where you got that experience from, right?
Yeah. And to get back to talking about when I was doing the master coach training, um, and seeing how powerful it was, what happened is, as my final project to graduate, I decided to create a course for daughters, adult daughters, because I realized at that point that it was much more exciting for me to go work in that area than it was to work on body image and weight loss. It also was like, it seemed like everybody and their sister were doing weight loss at that time, and I wanted to be different. And so I created this course. Out of that course came my first book on this subject, which was, at the time, it was called The Peaceful Daughter's Guide to Separating from a Difficult Mother. And a few years later, I revised and expanded that book. That book is off the market now, and the newer version was called Difficult Mothers, Adult Daughters: A Guide for Separation, Liberation, and Inspiration. And that's my cat meowing.
I was like, I thought it was my granddaughter here. So that's the first. So for someone who wants to take the first step in that separation, and you know, it could be mental, emotional, or physical separation, right? Difficult mothers, adults. Okay, so that would be the first step for someone, or would you suggest they start with a new book?
It doesn't matter. I mean, this book doesn't reflect some of the wisdom and knowledge that I now have, but this book is a bestseller. I mean, this book, not everybody loves it. There's some pretty shitty reviews on it on Amazon, but
I'm wondering if the new one could bring the triggers to face and so that you can see it, and then the other one will guide you how to take the first step. Would you say?
Yeah, maybe. But what's interesting is, so getting back to that master coach training, and I feel like this is an important thing to say, is that, and I had this realization, I don't know, within the past year, that as I was going through master coach training and beginning this healing, I mean, I had done other things prior, but nothing like, oh, I'm working on my relationship with my mom now, right? It was during the training that I reestablished contact with my mom. And if I'm honest about it now with myself, it's because I wanted to impress Brooke. That's why I did it.
Interesting.
And that wasn't a great reason. I don't regret it. But as we've now been talking about the nervous system, that was a piece that was missing for me in my healing.
Yeah.
Yes, the mindset and learning what my stories are, 100% helpful. But the nervous system piece is everything.
It's the whole reason I called the podcast and this show here, the playlist, like More Than Mindset. Mindset
Yes.
is first. You have to get the mindset so you can separate fact from emotion. It is near impossible to move into healing without the foundation. Even when I'm working with healers, I don't care what journey they've been on, what plant they've taken, what's like episodes they've been through. If they don't have this foundation, they can't come back to themselves. So you've got to get the mindset piece. It's impossible to move forward without it, in my experience and working with thousands of people. And it was the part that was missing from all of my healing and my journey, and my understanding was the mindset piece was missing. So when I went to LCS, it was to really master the mindset so I can bring all the pieces together. So it was basically like a pool of water with no framework. So once I got the framework, then it all made sense.
Yes.
Does that make sense? And then it's like, okay, now that we have the framework, we can break the frame and move it through. So I love that you're saying that. So the first, same with me with the awareness, when I realized that I was still carrying the mama wound and a couple of other stories of trauma in my back pocket, like just in case someone questioned if I was worthy and valuable and qualified for coaching. I was going to like pull this up and prove it. This is what I've experienced. And during that experience is when I realized I actually don't need to hold on to that anymore. That was my mind's way of keeping me safe. And that was like a way for me to defend.
Yes. Yeah. We talked a little bit about this before we went live, and I want to talk about it again. It's because to me, there's a nuance to understanding, like, why are we defensive? Why are we a certain way, especially maybe with our mothers, that we don't like, right? Like a way that we're being, and we kind of don't like the way we're being. And this is something as well that I think in some coaching circles that this gets bypassed or thought worked away, or this is a thought that you're supposed to reframe. And that is a statement like, my mother abused me, right? Like, oh, that's a negative thought. You need to reframe that. Like, no.
Or my mother left me. My mother rejected me.
Or my mother left me or rejected me,
Gave
right?
me up for adoption, or sold me out, or dumped me at a train station.
Any or all of the above. Yeah. And so, because I, at a certain point through this journey, was like thinking that I had to change my story to, oh no, my mother was amazing. Right?
I think that's interpreted very often though, because it's like we used to call it like putting potpourri on a pile of shit.
Yeah. Or like spiritual.
You're going to get flies.
Yeah.
I don't care what you put on top of it.
So there is somebody that I've learned a lot from, and I actually quote him extensively in one part of this book. His name is David Bedrick. And he puts forth a sort of framework of what is abuse. And I think it's really helpful for us to understand it in this way. At least it's been very helpful for me. And so this framework is that abuse is made up of four things. And I'm also going to talk about shame in regards to this. Abuse is a hurt, an assault,
Mhm.
whether it be emotional, physical, mental, spiritual, like whatever, right? There is a hurt. The second aspect is that there is a power differential between the person who is doing the hurting and the person who is being hurt. Power meaning physical power, social power, parental power, whatever, right? There's that difference, a differential, which leads to the person who's being hurt can't not consent,
Mm.
right? They don't
Like
feel
defenseless because of authority.
authority, or they can't. And or right, in a family, if we're little, right, she's the one who's feeding me,
That's right.
clothing me, housing me, whatever. I can't just leave, right? Or I can't beat her up, right? I can't, right? um and then that also, then the fourth aspect is the lack of ability to defend oneself. So
Gotcha.
not only can we not consent, we also cannot defend.
Mhm.
And shame enters the picture because there is a lack of a compassionate witness, or in other words, there's a shaming witness. And that's the person who didn't see what happened or should have seen what happened. The person who is, when they are told, they somehow dismiss it or gaslight it or tell you that's all in your head or
Painful.
those kinds of things. That's how shame enters the equation. And it's the shame that is the most traumatic piece.
Mhm.
And when you look at, if you were to compare this to, say, for example, two adults, right? So, like, there's two adults who there's no power differential, and one of them hurts the other, and the other person can say, "Ow, no, don't do that. I'm out of here." That's not abuse,
That's
right? There's an
choice.
assault or a hurt for sure, but it's not abuse. And it's unlikely that shame will enter the picture. But when you've been abused and you're an adult
Mhm.
and somebody comes and hurts you, and I don't mean your mother, although it could be your mother, the internalized shame that you now have because you were abused, because you had those four pieces in place, right? You now can't defend yourself. You're not going to say, "Oh, stop it." You're going to be like, "Oh, this must be because there's something wrong with me." Like
Mhm.
inside, right? Like maybe you're not going to be consciously thinking that, right? But like that is the piece that is so important to understand, why we feel so helpless as adults when we are hurt.
Mhm.
Some of us. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It's the habitual brain's reaction response to
Because
because we don't have the awareness to know the difference.
it's become
Yeah.
internalized,
Yeah.
meaning and that's why "it's not mine" was so powerful. Like, oh, this voice, this awful, painful belief that I have about myself that feels so true and so uniquely to me, it's not mine. And it never was.
Mhm.
Makes me tear up just thinking about it.
Mhm.
And so that's the work, right? Like, yep, unfortunately, for many of us who grew up in families where shame went unchecked, right? And shame, it's also, I think, important to point out that shame and fear were parenting tools back in the day. I mean, maybe, and some still are in some
Well,
families.
even in religion.
In religion, yeah.
I mean, that's
It is,
support to put you in front and like it for sure. I think
it's
shame is
how
the
we're
most powerful
controlled.
emotion. Like it controls everything, and fear comes from it because you'll do anything to protect it so you won't be exposed, because that's exposing the very essence of who you are, which is the thing that can get hurt the deepest.
Yes.
I had like such a long-term relationship with shame, and I do feel like I've gotten through a lot of layers of it. So it's not like I've seen myself in a few positions where I would have died of shame, is what I would have thought. And I would have gotten flushed and I didn't even have a prickle anymore. And it was because the last shame experience was so intense and I had the ability to stay with it.
Yeah,
And
me
I
too. I had one
remember,
last week, actually.
yeah. And I remember the moment I was walking on the beach and my ankle gave out and I just went down. Like I went off of the edge where the sand was piled up and I went down to my knees just like this. And I just pushed my feet into the ground and I came right back up. And this guy was jogging, came right on the side of me and he said, "Nice comeback." And I was like, "I know, right? That was cool." And I was like, "Oh my God, like I had had a huge shameful experience. I was moving through the 6 weeks prior. And I was like, it's like it was deactivated.
Mm,
It's just like it didn't have like fuel behind it, that wanting to close the door, turn off the light, lock the handle so no one could see it. It was just out it was so powerful.
yeah. Yeah. And I think it's also important to point out that shame in and of itself is so painful that it can trigger that survival response or trauma response.
Yeah.
And there's somebody I quote in the book, and I just love this, the way he puts it. It's shame is the combination. Wait, what is it? Yeah, shame is a combination of an emotion and a freeze state.
Mm,
I actually don't think of shame anymore as just an emotion. I think of it as an experience.
mhm.
It's more than just an emotion. Um, but yeah, that wanting to hide and lock the door and all that, right? That is like, you could call that like an expression of freeze and hiding, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
To
It's
say,
it's the thing that stops us from being and doing and exposing. And whenever we bypass it, the power's still inside. And so all that time we're bypassing and pretending, it's still the power is still right there that keeps stopping us and shutting us down. And what we want more than anything else is to be free. But we
yeah,
can't see that the path to freedom is going through that exposure.
exactly.
And we don't have the tools to go through it anyway.
Well, and we have, right? I mean,
Just spilled a
thank
glass of water.
thankfully, right? I mean, people are talking about this more. I mean, start like one of the first people I remember talking about it was Brene Brown. I don't know what, 2010-ish, when she had her like massive TED talk. Um, and so yeah, it's evolving and we're talking about it now, and I think that is hugely helpful. But to Brene's point, right? When we can be with it and share it with somebody who deserves us to share it, not just anybody. Like, I'm not going to be talking to my mom about it, right? But
Someone who's worthy of, who can handle it and is
yes, who
worthy of
can sit
hearing
with
it and
us with
receiving
in
it.
empathy. Yeah, that's my cat.
I just poured this whole thing of water all over me and the desk. So
Do you
we're
need to?
no, actually I found I had something to wipe it up. So
Okay.
oh, you never know. And I think that's how energy moves whenever things are uncomfortable. All kinds of things start knocking
Boom.
on the door and coming in. And that's, and I actually believe we create that. We create the distractions.
She may be feeling the energy.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought of that when I was reading your book and you talked about the dog with the digestive issues. And I was like, oh, that's because I've trained if Bridget is listening to her, I'll give her a little thumbs up, but does dog training. And it was really helping the emotion of the family, the parents, what's going on that's being reflected in our animals. That's where our animals misbehave. They're pulling that from us. And then they're acting out because we're all just mirrors for each other. And so she came through the integrative mind body coach training to understand that better, to kind of go along with the training of the puppies, and what was how they were acting out. So when you wrote that, I was like, oh yeah, that was clearly a reflection. Yeah, see, that helps that gets for us to see. It's for us. It's a catalyst, but we
Yeah.
don't see that. We just react and try to shut it down, bypass it, turn it off. We don't see it as a gift. We don't see it as an opportunity to resolve. And I think that there's just so much trauma, and I'll just give a definition of what I think trauma is. It's an incident where there was a separation of safety.
Yes.
Period.
Disconnection.
And so then there's a reaction. And so I don't want to use it as if it had to be some big thing that happened or didn't happen. It's actually something that happens in the nervous system that the the brain therefore creates a protection mechanism, and then it's locked in, and we were too young to go back and to remember and to know. And so life just keeps doing, and we just keep making it deeper and deeper and deeper until we finally recognize, and then we can start unpacking it.
And the shame, shame and trauma seem to go together. And I think it's because I make this point in the book, and I think it's such an important point to make. And I don't even know if this is actually, like, if you want to call it true, but again, this is a thought that I have, that I like how it feels in my body and how I show up because I believe it. And that is that we have learned to be ashamed of how our nervous systems actually work.
Yes.
If I freeze, that's bad. I shouldn't be freezing. I'm stupid. I'm dumb. I'm blah, 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 whatever, right? And that was actually kind of starting to happen in the beginning of this thing, right? Because on some level, my nervous system perceived a threat of, like, even though I've been interviewed many, 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 many times, it's like all of a sudden, like, oh, this is different. It's live. It's on YouTube. It's different, right? Threat.
She's not going to introduce me.
But like being able to see that and as it's happening and acknowledge it is so powerful. And so the point that I wanted to say is that for me, saying that response that I had is actually brilliant, that my body is so intelligent that it does that I can have so much, and it gives me goosebumps. I'm just having a sort of like a full body feeling right now of gratitude that my body does this rather than being ashamed of it. Like, that is huge. Like, that in and of itself is healing, right? This is smart, not pathetic.
Yeah. Would you say, so for those who are listening, I'd like to kind of frame that because it's so important. It's because you have the tools to know what to do with it. So you have a new norm, a new muscle that you're building for someone who's just starting this, that hasn't practiced staying, feeling through the emotion, being in the process, understanding. I call it like being a scientist of your own body. You're discovering, oh, isn't that interesting? Oh, look, it does this and it does this and it turns here and it goes there. And wow, it's like a pinball going on in my body. When you can do it that way, you actually diffuse that reaction because you get present with it. I call it getting closer to the wound. And so it's like, you're actually in there with it and you're picking it apart, and it's got this color and it's got this magnitude and it moves here and it radiates. And when I follow here, it goes here, and oh, my body's fascinating. But that's how long did it take you to practice it? You didn't learn this yesterday. And so I want to say that for the person who's listening, who is trying to do it themselves.
I would say that my practice around what you just described has been about 5 years.
Yeah.
And as I said, and I think I've alluded to, but I haven't gone into detail, and I don't really want to go into a lot of detail on this, but last Monday, I experienced shame. And it's funny. I have a quote in the book and I reference it several times, and it's actually from Stephen King. He wrote a novel called Fairy Tale. And as soon as I read this line, I'm like, it's so true. He says, it's just a little bit, and it says, and just like laughter and inspiration, shame doesn't knock.
First thing I wrote in my notes when I read the book, in like capitals. First
because
thing I wrote,
all of a sudden, here I am going
knock.
about my Monday. Something did happen. And I just, and it was as painful as it has always been. It was hard. I sobbed. I had tons of snot. I sobbed. And I'm sitting here and I'm like, I just freaking wrote a book about this. And now I have to use my own freaking tools. Like, damn it.
Imagine that.
But use them I did. And it wasn't pretty. I mean, it wasn't like some lovely healing experience. It was gritty, right? But it was, I like, in hindsight, I can say, like, I was present I had 5% of myself that could be sort of that observer that like kept going like this. And I actually did a little EFT tapping, like sobbing, right? And like all the, the phrases that were going through my head. And, it was a good day. It was a good 24 hours. Not the intensity of it wasn't 24 hours, but like for 24 hours, I was pretty tender, pretty fragile, right? But I took care of myself and I didn't hide. I didn't abandon myself.
Can I ask what brought you home? I'm a big believer in drivers. There was a driver that brought you home or that kept you in or that grounded you in that process. Do you remember what it was? What was the kind of like, this is not mine? Like what was the, while you were in the upheaval, because I think it's so useful for especially beginners who are starting to move through trauma and heal the mother wound and the shame wounds, to know that they can grab something that keeps them here.
That's such a great question. And I don't know if I can answer it clearly. I think it was just saying it out loud, like, and not in a nice way, but like, damn it, this is shame. God, I can't believe this is shame. Here it is. Even after all this time, I still am experiencing this. But there's a lot of
knock again.
Yes, damn it. Right. And a lot of physical touch to myself. That to me is really important. That like freeze, shame, freeze, hide energy, right? We're leaving our bodies. And so when I say I didn't abandon myself, it's like bring myself back into my body. I'm here, right? This is me. My body is still here. I'm not disappearing. Right. If you remember, I don't know if you've seen in the book, right, after several of these kind of painful stories that I tell, I say I disappeared, right?
Yeah.
Because I did. I just left. So it's keeping myself present to myself by literally reminding myself that I'm here. I haven't disappeared.
What I'm hearing is this is shame. It was just an awareness of this is shame. Like, I know exactly what to do with you. We should call it the uninvited guest. We should go do something with that.
It doesn't knock. It just barges right in.
It doesn't knock. Yeah, that's like the experience I'm talking about. That was so intense. And I was in a mastermind. And I mean, I got called out and like threatened to take the post out the group. You know how all that crap works. And it was a shame experience. My emotion was shame. And I was told that my circumstance wasn't neutral. So I couldn't be coached on, I was like, no, it's very neutral. It was fact. I was telling the coach, do I need to take you out of the circumstance? Like, maybe that's the problem, because what was going on for me and what my action was, it was an intense shame of being rejected and being left out and not being part of. And I wanted to heal that. I was sick of it. I had just had an incident with my husband, with my sister, and it was coming up in my business, in my mastermind, so I was like, I wanted, and I thought I was I'm in a $25,000 mastermind. I thought, oh, this is a high-minded coaching community that's going to be able to help me walk through this. No, I had to go outside of there and that's what led to that release that I had with the beach. And so it was perfect. It was a perfect catalyst. I didn't realize it would have to cost that much money, but, I was very grateful, for the experience. And I always come back to like, because you work with the clients also, it's like, what can we gather from our experience of staying in and not disappearing that they could maybe borrow until they find their own? Because I do work with a lot of people who are new to the nervous system response, the trauma, the mind-body connection, the integration, the embodiment, that they're kind of hearing about it now. But when I started this 8 years ago, it was unheard of, especially in that community. I felt like I was shamed for even speaking the language that the body expresses the trauma. Like I was told twice, it's on recording, to not believe that.
Yeah.
Why do you believe that?
So harmful.
Yeah. So it's like really getting through 3 years of that. And this is what people are experiencing in their own families when because you can have 5 kids and they all have a different memory of what happened. They all had a different experience. And you have this failure to launch, can't get it out there. And it's this story, this belief of how mom was so bad or this, and the rest are like, I don't even remember that, because our memories, they're not always true. And they are not validated because the others didn't have the experience. And then they go to these communities, they're not validated again. And then they go to society and they're not and it's like, just get over that. Won't you just move on? And the body's like, because it's a buzzing. It's a buzzing in the body. It's it grabs your attention. You can't let go of it, right? Did you experience? I mean, I shouldn't think everybody else experiences that. That has been my experience, because it doesn't make sense to me, because my mom is not here. Your mom's still here. I think that's fascinating too, that we can heal whether the person is dead or alive. We can heal whether they're in our life or not. And you can speak to that because you've done both.
It's interesting. So there's a couple of famous people who've been talking about this recently, both actresses. One is Drew Barrymore, and the other is an actress she's young. What's her name? Jeanette McCurdy, who wrote a book called I'm Glad My Mom Died. Mm. It's such a great book. And so Jeanette McCurdy's mom's dead, and in her book she talks about the abuse, all the things that happened, and how, her mother dying is part of her healing. And I think even though my mom is still here, I know that her death will also be part of an additional healing. It's not that I'm, but the idea that you can't heal until she's dead is not true.
Nope, that's not true.
And I also want to say here that this is kind of what Drew Barrymore has spoken to, because she's, I guess, was talking about this, and some tabloid reporters twisted her words and made it sound like she said she wished her mother were dead. And she said, I never said that. And I think the point here is that there's a big difference between wishing your mother were no longer here and wishing harm on her. Mm-hmm. Right? It's not like I want my mother to suffer in eternal hell or something like that, right? Or to be injured in some way. I don't want that. And, right, like, interestingly, my mom and her mom didn't get along. And that's part of why I was my grandmother's legal guardian in the end. But yeah, they didn't get along. She didn't go to her funeral. She's probably glad she's dead. Like, I used to not get that, but now I'm like, yeah, I totally get that. That's cool. Like, I get that. I understand it.
I'd love to speak to a couple of these things, since this is more this kind of talk than turned out to be. And one is that I'm just thinking about Drew Barrymore, how she's so, like, when someone's feeling emotional, how she goes to them. That's what that's coming from. I didn't realize she had a mother thing. I see that very often with her, that when someone's crying or someone's sad or someone's emotional, so that makes sense. I recognize that from myself. The second thing, maybe I'll let you go ahead and respond.
No, you go ahead.
Because the second one's a little different.
I don't know much about Drew Barrymore other than she's an actress, especially a child actress. I do know, and I don't want to tell her story because it's not my story to tell, but you can go find out what her story is. The basics are that as a child, right, she was in acting very, 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 very young, like baby, I think. And, by the time she was 11, 12, 13, her mom was taking her to Studio 54 in New York City and having her drink and do drugs, and very unhealthy.
Does she have a book? Does she have her story out?
I don't know if she has a book.
Okay. I'm just interested. The second thing that came to my mind when you were just saying that, and of course, guys, these are all just ideas. Like, Karen and I have spent 50, 55, 60, 120 years together contemplating this. And so whenever you really think about it, it's just experience. And I'm just asking questions. I'm just probing out of curiosity. And that is something that came up for me multiple times, was this jealousy and envying of my children being children. And I have shame about this. I didn't get to be a kid, and I didn't understand. And I struggled with this with my grandkids. I have 12 grandbabies, on like, I am not a good playful. I don't know how. I don't know how. It's so uncomfortable. It's so unfamiliar. I don't, and there's kind of a masculine part of me that's just like, it doesn't need that. And I know that's not true. I know that's not true as a coach and as a woman and a mother and a human. And I worked on this for probably the last 10 years. And I noticed with my children, a jealousy of them not meaning to be, but there was the child inside of me that didn't get, or didn't get the approval, or didn't get the love, or didn't get the, and I remember being surprised by that, as I was, because I didn't, like, I just watched it and I was like, okay, I was into personal development enough, because I started this very young, to recognize it and not allow it to continue. But I want to speak to it because you mentioned that about your mother and grandmother. And I just want to shed light on it for someone who might be experiencing this, to maybe drop into empathy and compassion of what they may be experiencing with their child who's actually getting something, or actually doing something big in the world, and how painful that is for them.
Well, I know,
And they don't have the awareness to address it.
yeah. It is very common for mothers to be jealous of their children, especially daughters. It's not, and there's, like, easy to say, there's nothing to be ashamed of for being jealous. I don't have children. I do have 3 stepchildren. They're all adults. 2 of them have kids of their own. And I've also navigated that. I don't know what I'm doing as a grandmother, right? And or even as a stepmother, because they were young when I got married, when my husband and I got married. But I don't know. Are you at, like,
I'm just mentioning, I'm not putting you on the spot at all, but
I
I've
know,
noticed
but
myself, I know, and I'm going to say, I noticed my child self
yeah.
do this in public also. Like, so I'm sitting in a mastermind and the presenters' children who are excelling,
Yes.
it's there. It's
Yeah.
there. I mentioned, I'll turn to someone who I can trust. Like, I'm sitting with someone else who had a not great childhood, who's got a lot of this. And we've been in relation. And I said, it really triggers me to watch these children excel and have all of this opportunity. And I don't love that I feel this way, but I don't want it to stay hidden. I want to release it. And she said, thank you for saying that. It was stimulating in her also. And so I'm just saying it because transparency is my first core value. And you know what, I'm not proud of this, and I'm human, and I do have some child like wounding that actually wasn't seen, wasn't heard, wasn't addressed, wasn't witnessed, wasn't raised.
So, although you and I had a different experience as children, I have had similar feelings, maybe coming up in different venues or different, circumstances. Um, Definitely have had the thought that, like, oh, if I'd had a different mother family situation, then I would be more successful. I would have had success earlier. I would have felt more confident. I wouldn't have done those things that I did, that I'm not happy that I did those things. And I guess that's jealousy. Like, or, and it has been sometimes when I compare myself to people, for sure. And it's probably because I didn't have my own kids that it doesn't show up that way like it does for you.
Yeah, it's definitely like when I wrote my book, I think the 2 reasons that we suffer is judgment and comparison. It's always due to competition. They got, I didn't get, so
Yeah.
it's not like a wounding that runs my life,
No,
but it is an awareness
it's
that
something
I
you
have.
notice.
And you probably experienced this in the whole coaching world too,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Because we've got all this experience, we've got all these, and then we watch these people get on these certain platforms and just, woo, they get this opportunity because of the way they look, or because of who they are, because of the time where they met
Because
the
they
coach who
didn't,
needed.
yeah, or because they weren't a pathetic
Same
loser
film.
like I was. Like, that's where my brain goes. It's because I'm pathetic.
Right. Like the mentor, I would never be like one of those divas to represent that business. So I can't get that highlight. That was what my shame piece was about. I was one of the top earners, or one of the top to make a certain amount of money. And there was a invitation sent out that they were doing a commercial for the business and how much money they made. And I wasn't one. And I was like, oh, that's interesting, because I came in the door as the highest earner and doing it organically, not from inside of the community, which is what was being promoted. Whereas the others were getting it inside the community, And so I was like, it was huge.
So there's a practice that I share in the book, which I don't think you've gotten to yet, based on where you told me you've read to, that got sparked because I was feeling envious.
Let's do it.
So the backstory is, the house that I'm in, the house that we live in, when we moved here.
I got to it.
What?
I did get to it, but go ahead.
Um, we moved in 2017, I think it is, whatever. But it's a brand new community, right? It's a brand new, we were the first people to build here. And there was like one model house, and then we built our house, and then one after the other, all the other houses got built. There's 14 total. And at a certain point, I would be going to look at these other houses as they were being built. And I would see things in these other houses that I'm like, why didn't I know I could have that? Well, I didn't know I could have that, right? Feature, whatever, bigger this, smaller that, this kind of whatever, pantry, I don't know. And I made it mean that I'm stupid because I didn't know enough to ask. I also then was piling on, you stupid idiot, you're so terrible because look, you're in a brand new house and you're complaining and you're jealous of these other people who have whatever. And so it was just this complete like whip myself, right? Like I couldn't acknowledge that, like, it was just a big massive ick, right? Like jealousy, shame, envy, all of it. Like, ugh.
I actually wrote that down. I was like, envy, jealous of other houses. Why didn't I know about that? And why aren't I satisfied?
Yeah, right?
I've,
Like,
I've
what?
experienced that myself. And I've become a victim because I blame it on, like, I didn't get enough exposure to nice things. And so now I don't know, like, I can't design my own stuff. I can't dress, with style. I can't, because I didn't have, because my mom never showed me. Like, I go into the victim story of
And
it.
it's funny because we have the same feeling, but the thoughts are different. That's so fascinating.
And the circumstances are different too. Like, that's what I'm saying about a wound is a wound is a wound. And
Right.
and
It
it
looks the
all
same on the
boils down.
outside.
Always, and on the inside, it's one thing, and
Yeah.
that is unworthiness.
Yeah, I was gonna say it looks different on the outside, but on the inside it's the same thing.
It's always unworthiness. Always, always. I've never seen it not be.
So here's my practice. So I read the book Untamed by Glennon Doyle. And in her book, in that book, she talks about a scene where she and her family are watching a television show. And in this television show, the girl, the teenage daughter of this family in the show, is about to come out to her parents.
Mhm.
And Glennon is sitting there and they're watching and they're hoping that the mother, handles this because they know what's about to happen, right? So the daughter says to her parents, hey mom, mom and dad, I like girls. And the mother says, oh honey, that's okay, we love you no matter what. And Glennon says, no matter what is what we say when we're disappointed. And I was like, ooh, like, right? And it was, so I'm having this experience with the houses and the shame and the envy and all that. And I'm reading this because I was also exploring the idea of like, what does it look like to love myself? And I was realizing that I love myself conditionally when I'm being good, not when I'm being jealous. No, I don't deserve love then. No way, right? Like that's shameful. I'm bad. And so I was playing with the words that we use, like no matter what, or despite, or in spite of. And I was realizing that like, I love you even though, or no matter what, right? I love you even though you're jealous. And I was like, even that is conditional. That's not whole because I'm cutting off a part, right? I'm cutting off this part that's jealous. I love you, but not that part. And so then here's the practice. You ready?
Yeah.
I love myself because I'm jealous. Not even though, not in spite of, but because. I love myself because I'm jealous. And I know you're going to get this, right? I don't know if you can see it on my face. I can feel it in my body. It's not just a sentence I'm saying. It is a feeling I'm feeling in my body that's true, that I can love myself, like, and feel the sensations of goodness and compassion and whatever you want to call it, right? I can feel it and
Mhm.
truly believe that.
Because I am that also. Yeah. Yeah. Because it's in EFT. I know you're also an EFT practitioner. It's the even though is just for that part of us to recognize that we've been
Yes.
recognized. And so
Yeah.
with the because it's recognizing that all parts are welcome, that
Yes.
all aspects are welcome, which is not what we're taught to do. We're taught to cut away, throw it, hide it, pretend, da, 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 da. And that's why we don't get the freedom that we want, because this is a pretty free conversation. We're pretty exposed. And that within itself is so healing, because we can recognize that maybe society thinks that we should be ashamed about that, as coaches. Like, I've been told, like, I shouldn't air my dirty laundry, like if I'm if there's something going on in my
Talk about
relationship
dirty laundry.
with one of, yeah, or with one of my kids. And I'm like, I would be a hypocrite. And that's us for, in our 6-2ish, we would be hypocrites if we are not walking our walk and being.
And if we happen to be hypocrites sometimes, we can love ourselves because we are.
Yeah, well, I'm hypocritical in the way of us saying, don't judge yourself, but we judge ourselves.
Yeah,
That
yeah, yeah, yeah.
aspect
Yeah.
of instead of just being the example of acceptance,
You know,
in all of it. Let me see I'm
um,
going to look and see what my other notes are, because we tend to hit a couple of important ones.
I want to share something. And I'm guessing, I don't know if this is true, but I know I've shared with you. I do have a friend who's really, really, really into human design, and she has taught me a lot about what it means to be a 6-2. And while I was writing this book, I had to let myself be the 6-2 as I wrote this book. And that it took me, it was hard at first, because I thought, oh no, like, I'm supposed to write this book in some other way than I actually wanted to write it. And when my publisher came to me, because I had proposed this book to them like a couple of years ago, and they were like, no, I don't want to write about shame. But they came to me last fall and they were like, I think we're ready for you to write this book about shame. And so I started. And I mean, the way who I am as a writer is that I'm always writing. So a lot of this was already written. It was a matter of turning it into a book. And then I decided to revisit all these times in my life, right, that I share in the book. So I have a meeting with the acquisitions editor, the publisher, and because she wants an update about the book. And I tell her, and I say, yeah, I kind of write this unconventional, this unconventional part where I tell these stories kind of in a very stark way. And she was like, oh, no, we don't do memoirs. And I was like, oh, shit. Because it's not a memoir, or is it? I don't know. But I cut out all those parts. And I'm like, okay, I'm just going to write a self-help book, right? And I couldn't. Like, I was like, I cannot write this book any other way than I want to write it. So I put all of it back in, and I submitted it at a certain point, and I said to myself, they're either going to say, no, we don't do that. And I'll be like, okay, I'll do it myself then. I'll publish it myself or whatever. Or they'll read it and they'll be like, huh, maybe this could work.
Mm.
And so I think the thing that was like the leap of faith was, in the 6-2 way, was like, this is how at least this 6-2 is going to be the role model.
Yeah.
And here we are.
And like, I can relate with that, because we have these old doubts that we have to follow this certain way. And then we have all of this self-image issues about not being worthy and not getting it right. And so that's battling. And then we've got this call that's going here. And it's so hard to stay here when you're not in that confidence or certainty of who you are, and we are bombarded with more of the voices of conditioning and humanity, and that, especially in the publishing company. I've worked with publishers and so many rules and what you got to do and I'm like, this is not for me. We're going to self-publish and just keep it trashy. Like, it's not perfect and the grammar's not great, but there's a process there that will help anybody. It's universal. It's through my own experience of how did I figure out how to want to live, raise 5 kids, stay married for 30 something years, be in business for 28 years. Like, how did I figure that out? And so it's not going to be in the publisher's eyes the way that they would put it out there, but we just respond. Well, for you said you offered them to write about shame and they said no, but then here came the invitation as a projector.
Yes.
It was right on time. That's
Yes,
interesting.
it was, because I wouldn't have been able to write this book 2 years ago.
Right. That's right. That's right.
In this way. So, and it's still I'm like, it still feels risky. It's like pathetic loser still lives within me, and like my fear is someone's going to read this and be like, yeah, she kind of is a pathetic loser.
And they might, and
they might, right? I know.
I mean, the more people we reach, the more negative responses we're going to get. It's just simple math. There's a lot of angry people out there, and that is their way of getting their shit off of them, is to throw it on someone else. And
I've done that too.
And it's our job to just keep moving through it anyway and be the example of being. That is our call, our role, is to be the example of how to be who we are. But it is not easy, because that means we have to be original. And it's the very thing we're afraid of, because mentally we want to be like everyone else, right? In school, you wanted to be on the team.
Well, that's how you stay safe. Like back in caveman days, right? Cavewoman days.
Yeah. Do you want to speak to, you said whenever you first started coaching, you were going to go into the body image and weight, because that is, I feel like that's something I've battled my entire life also, have gotten it down, it went off. It was my first niche, weight loss and wellness, and Brooke makes us keep it for a year, and it did really well. And then I realized I was trying to turn everyone into an entrepreneur when they would meet their goal. So do you want to speak to how that has impacted or how that has reflected? And just for someone who is maybe listening, who has this, this same wound that uses food to self.
So do you want to know what my shame storm was about last week?
What? They were going to see you're coming out and everyone's going to see what you look like? That's usually mine.
Yeah, yes, but no. So I've gained some weight in the past couple of years. And it's so funny that you say that about coming out and being out and people are going to see me, because maybe that is connected. But I got it in my mind that I needed to have a prescription for Ozempic in order to lose some weight, and this weight that I've gained. And you know what Ozempic is, right? Yeah. There's all a bunch of drugs out there, similar, whatever. And my doctor prescribed it. And my insurance company denied it. So then they tried a different one. And because I don't have diabetes. And they're only for diabetes. And the one drug that's the same drug, but basically just marketed, you don't have to have diabetes, it's called something else, my insurance company doesn't cover. And I had a meltdown. Because number one, I'm not going to get this drug. And number two, because, I should freaking know better than to try a magic pill, or except this is not a pill, it's a shot, right? Like the shame was, you should know better than trying to get a drug to do this.
Cheat.
Cheat.
Yeah, whatever the thing is. Yeah, I probably have about 30 pounds this past year. And I did an event in Austin, and the very first day with it, probably for sure in the first 2 hours, but in the first hour, like I'm not wanting to walk in front of the projector and then be projected onto the screen. So I walk behind it and I trip and fall. And I hear this voice in my head, go ahead and keep hiding. I was like, fuck you. I was like, I'm rolling with my extra weight on the floor in front of my audience at my event, and did not have prickly shame. I was like, this is I mean, I just like picked up my thing and went right to the board and started running, I was like, this is weird. Like I remember feeling I should be ashamed. I should apologize. I should address this, I had all these stories going on in my mind. But what really stuck to me is go ahead and keep hiding, keep going the long way around, keep tripping on yourself. Like instead of just being, just be. And it changed the rest of the event for me. But that was the message. Just like when I was dealing with the physical issues and I got coaching about being down for 16 weeks with sciatica, and then like losing my toenail and breaking my toe in place, like all this stuff that was going on with me when I was coming out with this mind-body healing approach, telling people they can heal their bodies with their minds. And if they understood what was going on with the nervous system and they can regulate. And then I'm sitting in this mindset community and she's telling me, why do you believe that? And I'm like, because I got like a broken toe with a flipped off toenail and a side, it's like, that's why I believe it, because there's a part of me that's scared to death to come out, that's creating all of this drama within my body to keep me safe. And so I shut myself down for 3 years, but it was all happening at that time. And when I think about like 6'2" role models, Louise Hay is my pioneer in healing. She is my very first mentor, 20 something years in. And she started Hay House in her 60s at this point in time in her age. It did not come when she was young. It came when the 6'2" was off the roof and bringing their being into the world.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So I had this dissonance of all these stories of all this happening, and just like, stay with it, stay with it, stay with it.
And I also recognize that I think having written this book, that I'm supposed to, like the shame says, you're supposed to now look perfect.
Yeah, for sure. The same way I'm doing my very first Mind Body Business Conference this year, which is bringing health and wellness practitioners who are really into self-healing together and teaching them how to promote and market themselves. And we'll have a healing room where their audience can experience all of these modalities. And because that's the first part, is we've got to help them get in their body. Not everyone can access it through the mind. So I love working with massage therapists, hypnotherapists, and just the mind body practitioners who understand body work and energy work. And that's what's going on in my head right now too, is like, if you got it all together and you got the magic universal approach, then what the hell are you doing walking around with this extra weight on you? And but it is a part of it is a part of the it's protecting a part of me not going too big too fast, so I don't get all the tomatoes thrown at my face. So my mind says I'm going to get arrested because I'm talking about self-healing. And it also tells me that the hospitals are not going to accept me. I'm never going to get a doctor to see me. Everyone's going to hate me. I'm ridiculous for saying that. Yet here I am, 15 surgeries later. I was on 24 years of medication. Let me put it that way. 24 years of medication, over a dozen diagnoses, and over 15 surgeries. And I stand here today completely healed, 10 years later, still in the same. And as if like I can't validate it with my own experience, right? Because I'm not a doctor. I don't have the badge. I can't say that. That's the mental stuff. And yet there are people who have done all the doctor stuff who are looking for the next. And I'm not available for them whenever I'm allowing those thoughts, because they've already done the other, just like I had done the other. And I'm not saying that that's wrong or bad. I am so thankful that they were there. But I wish my doctors would have understood about emotional wellness and unresolved trauma, and I could have saved my organs.
Yeah, I think, and I speak to this a little bit in the book. We thankfully, like those of us who are preaching this, right? It's like we're reaching a tipping point, right? That the body is equally as important as the mind, right? It's right, if not more.
It's expressing the subconscious. It's the subconscious in material form. In my experience.
Yeah. So as you were talking, I was thinking about the epilogue of my book and what I wrote. And I think it might be, I don't know are there other questions or you want to talk about? Because I was thinking this could be like a nice little wrap up if I read this little piece.
It was great having and just exploring all these conversations. We will wrap all of this up into a 30-minute and get it on the podcast, but for now, it's going to live here.
Okay.
And if anyone has questions and wants to reach out, we're going to have Karen's information down here below, and you can reach out. But yeah.
So I'm not going to read the whole thing. It's not that long anyway, but so as I was writing this book, our 15-year-old cat died. We had her put down. She was sick. She had some issues, and it was really hard. I mean, anybody who's ever euthanized an animal knows how hard that is. I mean, one thing, it's the grief, but like, I don't think it's possible to like take the life, right? And to not feel some sort of guilt or doubt or whatever. And so I'm in the epilogue, I write about that experience, and I said, in the second part of this, I said, life will always give me an opportunity to practice. And that seems like a good place to wrap up this book, because there will be days when you forget, you don't realize that you have put the glasses back on, the glasses being the shame glasses that we are looking through, right? You'll forget that you put the glasses back on. Does this mean that you haven't released the shame and are not healed and recovered? What even is recovery? According to the dictionary, it is a return to a normal state of health, mind, or strength. Normal? Really? It's also the action or process of regaining possession or control of something stolen or lost. What was stolen was your inherent dignity and worthiness. So what is recovery from shame? Abstaining from the idea that there is a normal. Remembering when you forget, because you will forget. Regaining possession of worthiness. Repossessing it when you lose it, because you will. Defining what it looks like for you, and then redefining it when necessary, because your perspective will change. It's not proving that you've overcome it all and are now perfect. It is not demonstrating that you have achieved a level of healing determined by someone else. That's the problem with writing a book like this. And that's the problem with reading a book like this, because there is no there. There is no eternal sunshine of the spotless mind. There is just being a human who may get to the point of asking to be shown the truth about their own inner being. The wound starts to heal not when you get rid of it, but when you no longer shame yourself for having it. I wrote that.
Through the lens of a 6'2". That's important. That's what I say about, like, this was through the lens of a 6'2" coming off the roof. And if I were to write a book today, it would say, like, that's what got me here.
Yeah, I would say probably this is, yeah.
But what gets me where I'm going, which I can't even see yet, like from here to there would be the title of it. Here to there. I did a podcast on it that came out this week of just being in the messy middle, and my mind is freaking out because I can't see what's coming. But I know what's here is I'm tethered from, like it's not connected anymore. And so there's this very wobbly middle that it feels uncomfortable. And I got to keep reminding myself that there is no normal. There was never a normal. There was never a state to arrive at, ever. It's just a notion that we make up and then get attached to,
Yes.
And so I keep coming back to, especially like for the 6'2" leaders and people from before us, when I look at their lives, like Tony Robbins is a 6'2", Louise Hay is a 6'2", like it's just a lot of life there, a lot of experience there. And that learning to be, when you've spent the first 30, 40, 50 years of not being enough or not being good enough, it's a habit. Like that, when you're reading that, that's what I was thinking of. It's so that old behavior is going to come. It's just a habit. And it's only when we can't see it, but if we can maybe create a little separation from it and see the habit is not who we are.
Yeah.
But
Right?
it will return because it doesn't get invited. It just doesn't even knock. It just barges in.
Yeah.
I love that, by the way.
And then we remember, and then we're like, okay, yeah, now next, right?
Oh, this was good.
It was good.
Right.
Thank you so much.
We're right here raw in the middle, guys. Still having the shame experiences, still battling some of the physical things that, what do you tell yourself to ground back, like with the body and the weight and the self-image as being a role model? Or because I hear that we're kind of toying with the same ideas that we should be different. We physically should be different. And yet on another hand, we still acknowledge that we're not done yet. And yet there's this, but you should be, if you're saying, then you should have the answers also. And I can't believe you if you look like that. That's what goes on in my head.
Me too.
Yours.
Yeah. I don't have a pat answer. There are two phrases that I love, and I didn't make them up. They're very simple phrases. One is "How human of me," and the other one is "Of course I am," or "Of course I did." Right? Like, of course I'm scared that people are going to think that I don't know what I'm talking about because I'm 25 pounds more than I was a couple years ago.
Right. It's just
Of
getting to the facts
course.
of what do we make that number mean? What do we make that size mean? What do we make that look mean? And
You know,
go ahead.
there's and maybe you've seen it. There's a video of, I can't think of her name, but she's the woman who founded, I think it's called Girls Who Code. She's like Harvard, Yale educated woman. And she spoke at the 2023 graduation of Smith College, which is an all women's college up in Massachusetts. And she starts off this talk by saying, so many people want to ask me how I deal with imposter complex or imposter syndrome. And she said a bunch of other things, but basically she's like, that's made up.
Is she the one who said, I'm not going to talk about imposter syndrome anymore? Like,
Yeah.
it seems like I've seen somebody say that, but I can't recall that. Maybe it was on
She's like, I'm not
TikTok.
going to talk about that. It's made up. And she talks about, she uses this historical thing that happened back in the 1800s and early 1900s when women started riding bikes. And she said that the powers that be decided that there was this affliction called bicycle face. And it was a woman whose face is flushed and she has a determined look on her face and her eyes are bulging because she's riding a bike. She's exerting herself, right? Of course, she's going to have a look on her face, right? Of that exertion, right? But it was like, oh, this is an affliction that you have. You have bicycle face. And it was freaking made up. It was like a way to distract women and like get back to focusing on, you're supposed to be pretty and not looking like that.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's the same. Imposter complex is kind of the same thing. It's a distraction to get us focused back on fixing ourselves.
Yeah.
Rather than doing and being who we want to do and what we want to do and be in the world.
When I look at it from the factual state and take the emotion out of it, I use food when I'm uncomfortable and am not dealing with my emotions in that moment. And then I can, like, it doesn't feel emotional, it feels factual. And then I can make a decision from there, that I'm not bound by it. I'm free to choose. I'm just not recognizing it in the moment when I'm doing it because I'm not willing to feel what I'm feeling. And a big part of this is because we are exposing ourselves. Like, I'm running Facebook ads for the first time right now. We're learning how to do it. And, so of course I've got some emotion in my body about rejection and tomatoes and comments and, all these things being bombarded with negativity. And it's because that is just a fact. The number of people you reach, there's going to be a number that dislike you, and there's going to be a number who will never tell you, and there's going to be a number who will always tell you. And then there's going to be a number that love you and want to hear from you. And are you willing to override in order to get to the ones? Like, are you willing to move through that mud in order to reach the ones who do? And that's why I think the driver is everything. And for 6-2s, our driver is, we know we're here to serve. We know we're here. There's a thing we're here to do. and we feel almost a pressure or responsibility that we have to do it, but we can't see it because the mind's trying to control it. And we just have to be, that's the way to do it. And we're like, what do you mean?
Or what does that mean?
Yeah, I'm not good enough to be. What do you mean? I've got to be something else or someone else. And that's the tricky part. So that is like the conundrum for us, to figure out. So it was great talking to you. I have a feeling we will be chatting again. And I'm just going to leave this here. I'll put your information on it. Is there anything you wanted to,
No.
Any last minute do you feel complete?
I do. Thank you.
I want to give it a second because I usually cut the last word off